I'm now a Spanish teacher. My whole business is teaching Spanish and making these videos, yet I didn't even want to learn Spanish. Many self-learners go to YouTube to learn the language, and it's good and it's bad. Here's how you can learn Spanish by yourself in 2024. Before we get started, make sure to hit that like button and also subscribe if you haven't already, and check out my website, conversational.com, for more free learning resources. So the reality is that even though now we have many more advanced tools in the language learning world than we did 100 years ago, 200 years ago, since we started speaking languages, the reality is that the idea of learning a language is still pretty much the same. But there are some incredible new tools that can help you learn even faster. So the first way to learn by yourself in 2024 is to set clear goals. Why are you learning Spanish? A lot of times when we're learning, we can become extremely unmotivated and we can give up. But if you have clear goals and you have a clear vision of why you're learning the language, then you are much more likely to succeed. So one of the coolest and most recent additions to language learning has been ChatGPT. Now I will say ChatGPT is absolutely incredible and really helpful for Spanish learning. Be aware that sometimes it is going to provide you with incorrect answers, but for the most part it is quite good and a fantastic free resource to learn the language. Now when it comes to language learning apps, they're extremely popular among learners, but beware. Do not use too many apps because you're going to spread yourself too thin instead of focusing in on a few resources deeply, and your learning is actually going to go much slower if you have 5 to 10 apps. I always tell students it's best to have 1 to 3 apps. When it comes to apps, my favorite ones for learning Spanish are SpanishDictionary.com. They have a fantastic mobile app. It's one of my favorite translators. Anki, which is fantastic for learning vocabulary. ChatGPT for any other random questions you may have about the language. Now, many self-learners go to YouTube to learn the language, and it's good and it's bad. The reality is you can learn things from YouTube videos, but many times your learning is extremely unstructured. Many times you're learning things in varying orders and you can get kind of confused. And I always tell my students you need to build your house on rock instead of sand, because if you don't focus on the basics and you just skip to object pronouns and things like this, then you're going to be struggling the more and more you progress in your learning journey. Now, if you are interested in an online course or more structured learning, then obviously you got to go to my website, SpanishWithNate.com, because not only will I teach you to speak good Spanish, but I will teach you to speak beautiful Spanish in 90 days. Now, I always tell students that there are 3 main pillars to learning Spanish: studying the grammar, speaking, and listening. Now, reading and writing are also important, and nowadays that typically comes through texting. Now, when it comes to speaking, listening, and reading and writing, free online language exchange platforms are really great. So the free app Tandem or HelloTalk, these are both great free options for you to practice speaking, whether that's writing or actually speaking with native speakers from around the world. Now, when it comes to grammar, remember, you gotta start with the basics. I oftentimes see so many students completely skipping over things like the alphabet and getting their accent down. It really is that simple. Like I said, you have to build your house on rock instead of sand, which is why you need to be studying the grammar at some point. It's not the most fun, it's not the most exciting, but it is extremely important, which is why I say you need to get some form of structure in your learning. Now, in addition to an online course like mine on my website, there are also awesome, great ways you can learn grammar with a one-on-one live teacher. italki.com is a fantastic example. In fact, my girlfriend has started giving lessons on my website, SpanishWithNate.com. If you go on there and you click on one-on-one in the little more tab, you can check it out. But that's a great way to learn, either in a structured system or with an online tutor. The next key to learning Spanish and learning it really well is to be consistent. Think of any difficult undertaking in life. If you want to get good at it, well, then you have to be consistent. Think about going to the gym, for example. If I go to the gym maybe once a week, I'm not necessarily going to get buff very quickly. But if I show up every day for maybe an hour a day and I show up, well, I'm going to see much better results. That is the key, being consistent. Now, when it comes to learning new vocabulary, like I said, Anki is great, and also Quizlet is a great free option as well. You can literally just sit down and study flashcards. Many times students don't know what flashcards to study, In my academy, I have a whole list of a ton of different kinds of vocabulary, and you can also just Google online 1,000 most common words in Spanish and create your own flashcards off of those words. I like thinking about the Pareto principle, which is the idea that a lot of times 80% of your results come from 20% of the efforts. So if you can learn the 1,000 most common words and get those down really well, then most likely you'll be able to have a conversation about 80% of the way. Now, if you want to learn a language by yourself, then you need to join an online learning community. I know I keep plugging my stuff a lot, but honestly, one of my favorite things about my academy is the fact that we have such an incredible private community. It is so cool to see people interacting with each other, speaking, and motivating each other. It is very easy to give up when learning Spanish. But if you have a community of like-minded people who are learning the language just like you and who can motivate you, you are much more likely to succeed. Next is that you should try to immerse yourself. If you're not in an environment where you're hearing Spanish all the time, well, I recommend you try recreating that. I love to tell students you gotta listen to music. Music is one of the easiest and most fun ways to constantly be listening to the language and be immersed in the language. So let's say every time you drive, how about instead of listening to music in English, you listen to only things in Spanish? Think about when you were a baby, right? How did you learn English? Well, you grew up, you heard the language all the time, and after maybe a year, 2 years, you actually kind of started to say things. Think about that. You spent 2 years without really saying anything very comprehensible. So imagine with your Spanish, if you were just constantly listening all the time, learning a new vocab, learning the grammar rules, and speaking, you'd be amazed at how quickly you can learn the language. And finally, if you want to learn Spanish, you just need to be patient. I always tell students, I would much rather you learn for 5 minutes a day for the rest of your life than for 2 hours, 3 hours a day for 2 weeks. Okay, it's much better to just be patient, go slow, and stay consistent. This is a pretty interesting story, but I actually did not want to learn Spanish. Okay, imagine that. I'm now a Spanish teacher. My whole business is teaching Spanish and making these videos, yet I didn't even want to learn Spanish. In fact, when I was learning Spanish, I did love it after I slowly started to get into it, but I never had the goal of becoming fluent. Imagine that. I never had the goal of becoming fluent. If you're watching this video, then there is a very high probability that you are taking your learning process very seriously. I was just kind of learning because I had to go to my Spanish classes in high school, and then I was like, well, this is cool. I'm actually going to try, and I'm going to speak with my friends. Let's see what happens, okay? So just think about that. If you can just be patient, relax, stay consistent, and have fun, you are going to be well on your way to learning the language fluently. If you want to become conversationally fluent in Spanish as fast as possible, check out the Fluent Spanish Speaker Academy. Here's what some of our current members have to say. One of my students, Jody, who's learning Spanish to better communicate with her Mexican husband, says, "Why not attempt learning with Nate? Surely he could give me some good advice since he was in my position at one point before. I look back to where I was and where I am now, and we've made great progress. And if you're reading this, let go of the doubts and join his course." Bueno, muchas gracias por ver este video. Espero que te haya gustado. Por favor, dale un like y suscríbete ya para que veas más videos chidos así como este. Y si quieres aprender más español conmigo completamente gratis, puedes en mi página web SpanishWithNate.com. Muchas gracias. Hasta el próximo video. Adiós.